Thank you.
Please go live. Please go live. It's always stressful the first few minutes of the symposium.
Let's make it work.
So, March 29th. Copy. To. I'm using the application for it's the stream on YouTube, so your presentation will show up on YouTube.
Is there going to be a camera somewhere? Is that the camera right there?
There's the camera here, but I might shut it off. That camera is supposed to be working.
So I should stay pretty close to the podium?
Yeah, you can if you want. If we nix the camera, then you can go wherever you want. I'll let you know before you come up.
Gotcha.
Oh no, we're sorry. So you're going to stay here. I'm sorry.
Right,
unless you want to walk around.
Say that again?
You're going to have to stay close to the podium. So that's you.
And where's that coming from?
Right there.
That's me.
That's so that little camera right there.
And for the microphone, is it around the neck?
So this one, you can also speak into that one. Everything's connected. Or you can hold that one. Really well.
I think if that works.
Yeah, it does.
That.
You can see what's happening once. And we'll do a quick switch off before you go.
Because you'll have it on.
Yes. Last quick check. That was very good. Someone's doing that.
I'll probably pull out my phone and have a clock because I don't see the clock.
There's usually a timer, and there's a clock there.
Gotcha. Okay, so this is what I'll see. I'll see that.
Yes, sir. And your display will be up there. Fingers crossed that.
So does this mean that when it's live streamed, can somebody go back and look at it later?
Yes, and it means people can watch it and send in questions. So we had a few people sign up for the live stream this year.
Will there be, I think there's going to be a fairly lengthy question and answer afterwards. And will they have somebody bring a mic around?
Yes, we have 2 microphones running in here, and we'll have a person watching if there's questions.
Rob, you'll freak out when you see how many slides I have. But I'm not going to go
These
through them
things
all
always
necessarily.
don't
I won't run them, I promise. I'll be on time. But I may fly through some slides and leave some at the end. That's okay because I'd rather have questions and answers. It's not. Oh, there it is. Yeah. The screen looks like that.
This game is different. So, come down here. I'm just rehearsing. So
Right.
this is the first one. So it's going to be toggle red. We go back to the first one. And then you come on. And yours is going to be
Oh, okay. Okay.
eject. So you can let's check safely. Thank you, very patient.
Thank you. Very efficient. Good. Good luck.
Testing. This is a test for the live stream. Hello. Okay.
Good morning, everybody. All right, we're only getting started 2 minutes behind schedule, so we're already setting records, and we're more on time than past symposiums have been, we think. So, we'd like to introduce ourselves. We are this year's co-chairs for the 12th annual University of Minnesota Plant Science Symposium. I'm Ryan Mary.
And I'm John Hill Price.
All right, and let's get things started. So we'll start with a short introduction and then get going. So we're proud to introduce this year's theme, International Perspectives on Global Hunger, Feeding the World Through Innovation, Collaboration, and Communication. For this year's symposium, we strove to go beyond the U.S. and how steps are being taken to address world food issues. As a committee, we came to the realization that a majority of the talks that we hear concerning food hunger, or world hunger, focus on increasing production here in the United States. And while this is, of course, very important, we became interested in what international efforts towards this mighty task might look like. So for this symposium, we will open with insight into how this very symposia series moved into the international realm. We will then listen to the international work of one of our very own University of Minnesota professors. We will travel to Malaysia to learn about crops that have fell to the wayside with time, but now have the opportunity to gain new importance. We will learn how Corteva, an international company in its own respects, is making advances in crop research side by side with another large organization in Brazil. And we will close with insights from Africa into improving crop nutrition for vulnerable areas.
And before we begin today's activities, we'd like to make sure to thank our sponsors: Corteva Agrisciences, the Minnesota Soybean Research and Promotion Council, the Minnesota Wheat Research and Promotion Council, the College of Food, Agriculture, Natural Resource Sciences, and AdFarm. Thank you for seeing the value in and supporting student-led research conversations. Without your support, this symposium would not be possible. We'd especially like to thank the Minnesota Soybean Research and Promotion Council and the Minnesota Wheat Research and Promotion Council for providing financial assistance for student travel grants. Because of their generosity, we were able to bring in a record-breaking 16 traveling students from 9 different universities. And finally, we'd like to thank our planning committee. This symposium is completely organized from start to finish by student volunteers. Everyone stepped up to the challenges placed in front of them, facing them with creativity, poise, and enthusiasm. Thanks to your hard work, this symposium is an event to be proud of. And with that, we'd like to introduce Dr. Tabre Abedi, longtime friend and supporter of our symposium, to get us started.
Good morning, everybody. It's a great honor to be here once more in this 12th consecutive annual symposium here at the University of Minnesota. It is very touching for me to be here as an alumni of the university and to see the students and organizing events like this along the years, and having incorporated this event into the life of the departments, and having constructed a system for succession along the years in terms of leadership. It is really outstanding. It is also outstanding to see the accomplishments of this specific symposium. You know, the numbers that were mentioned by John and Ryan, you know, are really outstanding. It is very important to remember that one of the objectives of this series is to actually build a true international forum for student communication and empowerment. With that, I would like to do a little bit of an introduction to the series for you guys to have an idea of what the series is, and you know, to have a little bit of context of this, thinking that this is one event, and it is indeed the founding event of the series, but it is, at this point, it is one of other 50-something events around the world that belong to this series. So the objectives of the series are several. And as you see, we try to cover important components on this, but they are all related to the fact that the series and the symposia are fully student organized, right? So students organize, run the logistics, run everything around the event, and also now participate in the broader organization of the whole series too. We like to emphasize the objectives of the series are mainly educational, right? I mean, to bring additional skills for, the portfolio of skills that students are going to bring into their future careers. What is the series, or where have we reached? And this is the list of universities that belong to the series. And as you see, we are at this point more than 50 universities and centers around the world. But again, I want to emphasize that the University of Minnesota was the founding event and was really responsible. The students of the university were generous enough to take this idea to all these other universities around the world and now network with them into this larger series. Every year we include new centers or universities into the series, and the highlights of this year are going to be Makerere University in Uganda, Munich Technical University in Germany, and let me see if I see here, and the Universidad Federal de Rio Grande do Sul in Porto Alegre in Brazil, among others. I mean, we are still defining a few other additions for the second half of the year, but they have not fully been defined yet. But as you see, it is a pretty ambitious endeavor, and it takes a lot of work to actually keep this series and objectives together. But one of the major accomplishments of the university is not just having been able to cover geographically different areas of the world, but to do this, to actually connect those areas through the whole series, right? And I think this symposium is a testament to that, bringing people from all over the world to participate as speakers and as student participants. It is a major accomplishment, and it's a great accomplishment for this event, and it's an accomplishment for the series too, because it's one of our major objectives is to build bridges and communication and a real global network of possibilities for graduate students to develop their careers. Another area that is very important to essentially plan breeding symposia, right? As we began to expand into other universities around the country and around the world, the series of topics that were included began to broaden considerably. And as you see, although plant breeding is still like there in the center of that cloud, we have been able to expand the areas of interest considerably along the years, and we are committed to actually do that by incorporating every year new events in areas related to engineering, precision agriculture, big data, etc., etc., etc. As Ryan and John emphasized, these events are fully organized by students, and students run absolutely all the details related to logistics, to budget, and to topic selection and speaker selections. So essentially, our contribution is just to actually keep the series running around the world and to try to keep the structure of the series faithful to the original events, but the students have absolute independence to actually do almost whatever they want. I mean, within the limits of reasonability in each of their events, and this has been a very successful model, to be very sincere, because there is a lot of learning that goes across generations and across schools and across groups and now across geographies too. And that, you know, maintains the quality of the events in a very, very high standard. Another area that I think that is very important to emphasize is the area of you know, empowering and you know, building opportunities for leadership. And of course, you know, I already talked a lot about, you know, the high standard that this specific symposium has reached. You know, clearly there is a lot of know-how that has been transmitted along the years, and there is a lot of talent in the student pool to actually be able to actually produce this. In this sense, you know, we have generated last year an International Student Advisory Council, and these are the students from 6 different universities around the world that participate on the governance of the whole series. And you know, we are, you know, we bring to this council, you know, different topics related to governance, succession, and future of the series. You know, this is a way for us to project this series into a new era of even broader and stronger participation of students. By the way, since these students are graduate students and they only qualify to be in the council while they are graduate students, they are, you know, they are graduating, some of them, right? And so that is a great news, and at the same time it's a great news because there are going to be some openings in this council. We are going to be calling for applications for membership to this council in the near future. So stay tuned and participate in it. It's a great opportunity for leadership. Another area that I think is important and is another of the objectives is to expose students to different career paths, you know, and these are all, you know, when we look at all the speakers historically in the approximately 135 symposia that we have had along this 12 years, you know, this is how the speakers break out in terms of provenance. And as you see, there is a big component there of university speakers, but there is also a big component there of speakers from the private sector that includes, of course, Corteva and Heritage Pioneer, but also a lot of other companies in the private sector, and also public, other public sector speakers too. So this is one of the topics that we are discussing with the council, how to even broaden this even further and to include more participation down the road for more junior scientists as an opportunity to participate as speakers in this series. Last, in terms of communication, we have several portals in which you can actually follow the series. One is a Facebook page that is run by organizers, and the other one is our own web page in which you can actually search to look for the upcoming events in the series. And with that, thank you very much again for being here. Thank you those that traveled from very distant places to be here with us today. You know, fortunately, Minnesota has behaved very well and we have a good weather. You know, and believe me, this is very good weather, right? And again, thank you very much to all the organizers for a great job, and to all the predecessors, that a lot of them are here also as professionals now, because through their experience and their ability to transmit their experience to their successors, we are able every year to improve and to reach new heights in this symposia series. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lu. I'm a grad student at the U, and today I have the pleasure to introduce you Dr. Paul Porter. Dr. Porter just told me he's gonna retire soon in January of next year, so I'm very excited to hear his talk with us today about his career path. And Dr. Porter is a co-founder of the Somali Agricultural Technical Group, working with scientists and government officials to help develop sustainable agriculture strategies for Somali. Dr. Porter's research explores crop rotation, rye as a cover crop, alternative cropping systems, and agricultural issues related to food systems, often from an agroecological perspective. As a former Peace Crop volunteer in Zaire, he received his master's and PhD in agronomy from University of Illinois. And he also teaches several courses, one of which I've taken and was one of my favorite classes. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Porter.
So thank you, Lou, and thank you to the organizers of this conference. I'm delighted to be here and looking forward to hearing the other speakers and being done with this talk. I am on a timeline to be done at 9:45 to give us 15 minutes for questions. And I really want 10 to 15 minutes of questions and answers, and I'm encouraging you to ask me questions. So be thinking of that as I talk. But before I begin, let me explain, and I'm going to come over here and maybe mess up this live stream, this vest. This is a bit loud, isn't it, for me anyway, and for an agronomist. But I happen to get this vest as a gift from a former graduate student. 2 weeks ago, I was in India, the northeastern state of Nagaland, and we have a former graduate student. Her name was Sama Ao, who's now back there teaching as an assistant professor at Kohima Science College. There was a group of 7 of us from Minnesota who went to Nagaland and participated in an international symposium on integrated land use management in the Eastern Himalayas. And I'm showing you a picture that we took after the conference. We stuck around, a couple of us, for a couple days and went out into the countryside and traveled and saw. This is terrace rice fields. There's not rice growing on these fields, but a plant species called Izola, which is used then for fertilizing the next rice crop. Rice and other crops. This is more of a settled agriculture. There's a big debate in this state as to whether the agriculture should become more settled or if they can continue doing the slash and burn technique called June cultivation, which is quite innovative, and I was very impressed. The little I learned about it while I was there. An offshoot of the June cultivation is a alder-based June cultivation, and I'm standing next to a tree that had been pollarded. That's an alder tree. It's a nitrogen fixing species, and it provides the nitrogen for crops grown underneath. The growth up on top is cut off in the years that they want to farm with crops underneath. Very, very interesting system, very educational experience. But what I'm here to talk about is feeding the world. That's not me, that's not my idea. It's more, how can the world feed itself? And that's what I'm into. I'm gonna direct a lot of this presentation towards graduate students and undergrads if they're here, not necessarily to the older people in the crowd. And I'm gonna give you stories and tidbits. And by that, you're going to find out I'm not a very linear thinker, and I bounce around a whole lot, so you may struggle as you hear me talk, but here are some of the tidbits I'm going to talk about. You know, they're listed there. See if you can find them during my talk. I want to help graduate students think about their career out into the future. And so the outline for my talk is to really spend way too much time talking about me, my education, my work experience, my interests, my philosophies, international experiences. I'll touch on those. Then I'll talk about this SATG group that Lou mentioned, and finally Filson, which is SATG is a 503c nonprofit. Filson's a public, not a public, it's a private company that we're starting in Somalia. And like I mentioned, I'll leave an awful lot of time for questions. So here's a timeline of my life. This is 50 years. I could really bore you, couldn't I, with 50 years of my experience. And I'll start trying to do that, and believe me, I'll be done in 30 minutes or so now. So, who am I? I grew up in Fergus Falls, Minnesota. You see the circle there around Fergus Falls. It's located between the Mississippi and the Minnesota River. It's located actually on a continental divide. Anybody know the continental divide there? Speak up. What? Red River Valley, Vern Cardwell says, versus the Mississippi, Minnesota. So at Fergus Falls, the water in Fergus Falls goes west on the Otter Tail River, and then north up to the Hudson Bay. You just go south of town, and the water flows south. So grew up in Fergus Falls, stayed close to home. I didn't want to come down to the big cities. That was too far away. I wanted to participate in sports. I was a runner, and I did cross country and track. Went to Morehead State, got a BS in chemistry from Morehead State College, then it became Morehead State University, and now it's Minnesota State Morehead. It's changed around. 5 years later, I got an agronomy degree from the University of Illinois in my master's. 3 years after that, another agronomy degree from the University of Illinois. So that's sort of my educational background. If we then look at my, my job titles, who am I as far as my work experience? It took 5 years between my BS and my master's because I took a couple years to be a Peace Corps volunteer. I was an educator in a high school, taught biology, chemistry, and math in a small village in eastern Zaire. Back then, I'd have to tell people, well, Zaire is the former Belgian Congo, and now I have to tell people, well, Zaire is the current Democratic Republic of the Congo. It's got Kinshasa as the capital. So a couple of years there, Peace Corps volunteer. Then in 1986 through 1988, after I got my PhD, my first job was overseas, working on a USAID-funded project in Somalia. I went out to Laramie, Wyoming for a job interview, and I never went back to Laramie, Wyoming until after I was done with my 3-year stint. My entire time with the University of Wyoming was spent in the town of Baidoa in Somalia, working on an agricultural development project. It was an assistant professor role, but non-tenure track. Then I came back to the United States. I went back to Illinois where I had contacts and did a postdoc, did a few more publications. And then it was a career decision. Where do I go? Do I go with the first job that comes up? Do I want to go industry? Do I want to go academia? I had an offer to go industry. Then I got an offer to go to Clemson, and I chose Clemson. I spent 5 years at Clemson University, rural South Carolina. I wasn't up on the main campus at the town of Clemson, or where Clemson University is located. I was located in Blackville, South Carolina, quite rural. There's a nice research and extension center there, and so I worked there as a researcher and an extension specialist. 5 years in South Carolina, a couple kids later, there was a pull to come back north to Minnesota when a job opened up out at Lamberton in southwest Minnesota. I came up and I interviewed for it and got that position. That was what year? That was in 95, early 95. I started with the University of Minnesota. I've been here ever since. I spent 5 years at Lamberton before the opportunity came up to come up to the St. Paul campus. At some point, I climbed the ladder and became an associate professor, and then coming up to the St. Paul campus in the year 2000, I picked up a formal teaching appointment, and slowly over time my teaching appointment has increased. Became a full professor in 2006. So that's kind of boring, isn't it? But that sets a background. My field research has involved way too many crops. So for those of you who are involved with cropping systems, crop production, probably focus a little more than I did. But I enjoyed working with a lot of different crops, and it's been a fun career in that sense. My publication record is not necessarily stellar. At 1995, these are 5-year increments. I had 3 publications out of my master's. 5 years later, I had a few more. Didn't do a lot of publications in in Somalia when I was there. Wrote a lot of reports. Should have put them into publication form. They'd have been more sustainable. They'd have been easier to find. I'm really realizing that many years later. So you see there's a progression of publications. But in all honesty, when looking back, this is not necessarily my forte. I can do it. I was very good young at it. It doesn't thrill me. It doesn't give me a passion to publish my work these days. So I've taught quite a number of courses, and I've gravitated towards courses that I really enjoy teaching. World Food Problems has been on the books here at the University of Minnesota for over 40 years. Vern Cardwell, who's down in front, taught this class probably 30, 40 years ago. That's been a fun class to teach. It's really changed over time. Today we have more of an issue with obesity, malnutrition on the overeating side than we do on the undereating side. Today, the other big factor that we're bringing into the class is climate change and the importance of climate-smart agriculture. So that's a fun class. Agroecosystems of the World is a fun class that I co-teach with Dr. Mary Brockie. Then Lou mentioned the summer field course that we team up with professors and students from Iowa State as well as University of Lincoln, Nebraska, Chuck Francis. Great class. Then a more Minnesota-based management class. And you see a list of other classes. There's a couple listed there. Food and agriculture from Cairo to Cape Town at 10 miles an hour. I'll go into that in a little more detail here in a bit. So international experiences. Where did I get the desire to do international? How did that come? It's a good question. I was really fortunate. In 1972, as a 16-year-old, my parents took my brother and my sister and myself to Europe. We landed in Luxembourg and we bought 5 bicycles and we spent 45 days traveling around Europe by bicycle. And when the bicycling got tough, we'd throw our bicycles on a train and usually go uphill and then ride back down. Very fascinating. 72, if you remember, Richard Nixon just re-elected. He was going to end the war in Vietnam. Europe was kind of wise in saying, why the heck is America in Vietnam? We saw a lot of the tension. So it was a fascinating time to be in Europe. Liked it. A few years later, I went with a friend for a summer job in Europe. Then after graduating, the opportunity came up to be a Peace Corps volunteer. I thought, this is going to be an experience. I'll learn a lot about Africa in agronomy. And so went back to school, got a degree pretty much with the idea that I wanted to go back to Africa. And in fact, the opportunity came up, got a nice job as an assistant professor, pretty good pay, not tenure, no longevity to it. So I did that job. By 1988, close to 1999, situation in Somalia was getting more tense. It hadn't fallen apart yet, but a second phase of that contract did not happen. We came back to the United States, and then I went down the path basically of academia. While I was at Clemson, I had the opportunity to go to France. Also, I went back to Somalia in 1994. There's a story there I'll tell you. It was to write a McKnight proposal. That didn't get funded. They were wise. It wasn't quite the time 1994. It's still not probably quite the time, but that's a long time ago. Russia in 97, Australia for an organic conference with the IFOAM Symposium conference in Adelaide. So a few international experiences, but not heavily loaded. But come 2009, I requested a semester leave, and I was granted a semester leave. And the idea was that I would ride a bicycle with a group on an expedition starting in Cairo, going to Cape Town, and it would take 4 months, and we would pass through 10 countries. And I said, you know, if you let me do this as a semester leave, I'll teach a course as I do it. Every day I'll take a satellite phone and I'll call in and I'll leave an audio blog on a website that students can listen to that I will talk about what I saw on the landscape, what I ate, what was the agriculture. I had a co-teacher back in the classroom. It worked very well. We had guest lecturers come in. They would follow me as I'm riding across Africa. How cool is that? Yeah, it was an innovative class. Problem was, halfway through in Tanzania, I fell down, I broke my arm, and basically had to stop. Came back to the United States, had surgery, got it set. Convinced the department and the college that, gee, you know, next year we could do the same thing, except I would be in the classroom for the first half of the semester, January through March, and then March through May, I'd ride with the bikers again and do the second half of the ride, and that's what we did, and it worked out very good. A second year of a class teaching from abroad. It worked out so well that when I came back, I convinced the college and the department to some degree that, gee, wouldn't it be good if I do this again? There's a ride in South America that goes from Buenos Aires up to Lima, Peru. It's in the fall semester, starts in September, it's done in December. I'll do the same sort of class, but also this time, let's work it so that students, if they want, can come with the tour group. And so there were 3 brave undergraduate students who signed up for a semester abroad experience, bicycling from Buenos Aires to Lima, looking at food and agriculture. I taught a couple of independent courses, and they picked up a language course and another independent course. So they got full credit while riding a bicycle from Lima, from Buenos Aires to Lima. Kind of interesting experience. That's a long time there. 2012, so basically every year since 2009, I've been overseas in some capacity, and I've really picked up my activities in Somalia. So I was in Somalia in 13, 14, 15, 16. I wasn't in Somalia, but I was fortunate to be part of a Land O'Lakes Global Food Challenge, where they would take undergraduate students to a couple countries. Did that in both 2016 and 2017. In 2017, I also had the opportunity to give a presentation at a conference in Jerusalem, and went across the border basically to visit a former graduate student, Omar Tisdale, who was from Iowa State originally, did his PhD up here in geography, and I was on his committee. Now working in agroecology out of a university in Ramallah. Fascinating experience to actually cross the border where there's a big fence and see that. So that was 17, 18, what do I say? 18, I was in Mogadishu for another USAID project, Gelb funded, and Adam Smith. And earlier this year in 2019, I was to Benin for an evaluation of a USDA Foreign Ag Service project on vegetables. Britta Hansen from this university and others are associated with that effort. And then, as I mentioned, I was in Nagaland in northeastern India. So I'll give you some more details about that. But before I go there, let's talk a little about this adventure learning. I'll show you some slides. It'll lighten this thing up just a little bit. These are all slides that I've taken or people have taken of me. We'll start out with the Tour d'Afrique in 2009, 2010. We were like a traveling circus. There'd be about 40 to 50 riders. we'd put up tents each evening, eat meals that they provided. That we had a cook, we had a chef, we called him a chef. He had 3 pots to cook out of for 40 or 50 people. And we put up tents. People in the surrounding communities, often we'd be out in the rural area, so people, farmers would come and look and say, what's happening? What are these people doing running around, putting up these little nomadic type houses? And then the next morning we'd take them down and we'd ride on. So every day we kept moving. And one evening in Ethiopia, there was at sunset just an interesting experience. So here's the route we took. 10 countries, 12,000 kilometers, about 120 days in theory. That's about 60 miles averaged biking per day. We would have rest days, but on average about 60 miles. Fascinating experience. And I'd be talking about agriculture, and I'd be in the Sahara Desert for days. So what am I going to say back to the class? Well, I saw this herd of goats and a couple sheep, and there was no food. There was water. We were close to the Nile, but what were they eating? I don't know. But so that's some agriculture. The Nile's dammed at Aswan, and it flows back up into Wadi Halfa in northern Sudan, and so it was an experience. We actually took a boat across the lake. It's a 340-mile lake, by the way. That dam. Didn't ride around the lake. Up. Where am I going? I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to push that button. Help me, somebody, I'm stuck. Oh, wait a minute. Battery is running low, it says. You can't see it, but I can see it. We need to plug this thing in. So I'm going to close that. I'm going to remember to plug this thing in and keep going. So just some images, a lot of interaction with the locals, but in reality, more interaction every day with the people I was riding with. So great friendships formed with the riders, not so much with the local people because we kept moving every day. But fascinating interaction, sights, foods. This is injera, some bananas, some sugar cane, people selling along the roads. We basically went on roads, sometimes good roads, sometimes bad roads, but we were on roads, and I was very cognizant that just over that mountain, there might not be a road, but there might be a village that people are walking their produce into and out of. You can see the diversity. This is northern Kenya. Battery running low again. Nope, there it is. Thank you. Just absolutely fascinating, friendly people. We'd stop and people would materialize and come and talk to us, and oftentimes we couldn't understand what they were saying. A lot of hardworking people in the continent of Africa. So I told you I had a fall. Somebody took a picture. This is what it looked like. I didn't know it at the time, but it was a compound fracture. I had assistance from other riders. Taryn, I'll tell you a story here, said, oh, I got the thing for you. Let's clean that up. I've got a tampon. We'll put that in the hole, then we'll wrap it up. And sure enough, we did that. I got back on the bike, and I rode for another 40, 50 minutes. And then the medical truck came up from behind and said, Paul, let's wrap that up again. And so they unwrapped it, and blood came squirting out, and somebody almost fainted. It didn't look good, and the medic on the truck said, Paul, you got to get on the truck. And she's the boss, basically. That meant I had to give up EFI, which is riding every fantastic inch. Up till then, I had ridden I'd never taken the truck, right? So it was a blow. It was a real blow, but it was an even bigger blow when we couldn't get it stabilized, and I had to go to a hospital, and eventually they took x-rays, and there's some bits and pieces there that don't belong. And so now I have this metal screws and a little plate in there, and it works very well. And actually sometimes at the airports, if they wave the wand real close, it'll beep, and they'll look at me and say, what the heck? And I'll see, I got some metal in there. So anyway, fascinating sights on this bicycle ride. What an experience for an agronomist to be looking at, what do I see on the landscape? And why are they using oxen to prep that land for rice production? So I was mentioning EFI. Tour d'Afrique, the group we went with, were kind to me. I've got a little asterisk in their record book saying, okay, he was EFI up till that point in 2009. He was EFI in 2010. We're going to give him that little medal which said, I rode every fantastic inch across the continent of Africa from Cairo to Cape Town. It's kind of cool, but cooler yet was when I got to Cape Town. I had a colleague in 2009 that lived in Cape Town. He said to other riders from 2009, let's acknowledge Paul's finishing the tour in 2010. That booklet there that I got has like 40 letters in it from my colleagues from the previous year. It's those friendships that are important. So I'm going to have to go through this quicker. Now we're going to talk about South America, some images from South America. Well, let's just go back there and say. So we went across the continent, up and over the Andes near Santiago, Chile, up along the coast, back up into the Andes, into the Altiplano, through La Paz, near Machu Picchu, and ended up down. And so we'll show you slides from that. So the gauchos, they exist. They're a lot more cropland, a lot less grazed land, but where the cropland is not as productive, lots of grazing still. This is the San Juan River canal. It's not the river itself is dry because all the water is diverted to these grapevines. Fascinating. Still in Argentina, high elevation, women planting potatoes, and at the same time some furrow irrigation. They plant a row and they open up the ridge and irrigate the land. Very adapted agriculture for that climate. Down into Chile, now we see some livestock. Moving up through another desert. Mind you, I'd already been through the Sahara, the Kalahari, and now we come to the Atacama, which is considered in some, probably rightfully so, the driest place on the planet. Volcanoes, oasis, where there is water, there's agriculture and people. At high elevations, there's agriculture and people, very adapted. I showed you slides of terracing from Nagaland in India, Asia. I saw terraces in Ethiopia that are part of the national, not national, UNESCO site. These are more old terraces on Lake Titicaca, which is on the border between Bolivia and Peru. Fascinating landscapes, fascinating views. Here I'm looking at Machu Picchu. The peak, which is right there, is where I took the next picture looking back towards this direction. We climbed that peak. We were in pretty good shape. We were accustomed to the elevation at this point. We had spent like 20 days at over 10,000 feet bicycling. Think about that. That's interesting. So this is a view back onto Machu Picchu from that other angle, and you see all the agricultural terraces and how important that was for this culture. Keep going more towards Lima. It's quite dry, again, another desert, but where there's water, where there's irrigation capacity, they grow food and they grow corn, lots of corn stalks, and here you see some of our riders going around it. So, Jace, more about me? Yeah, I'm getting there, I better keep going. I asked the question, when do you become who you are? All of you grad students, who are you? And yesterday there was a workshop, and one of the comments was from Maggie. She said, know yourself. And the question, well, when do you become? I asked this. I asked myself way too many questions. You know, 87, I was a chemist, then I was a returned Peace Corps volunteer, I was a husband, an agronomist. I became an academic. I'm still kind of an academic, I guess. A father again, a teacher in 2000. Then I got on this kick of trying to run and be athletic and do endurance sports. So I was a marathoner, a triathlete, an Ironman, ultramarathoner, then a professor, still a professor, a long distance bike rider. So who am I? Well, I'm gonna become an entrepreneur, right? And I'm gonna become an emeritus professor. And I still have 30 years left of my life. And I'm walking away from a 10-year position at the University of Minnesota, I could stay here another 10 years and earn another $1 million, right? But is that what I want to do? Well, I've chosen not to. So it's about knowing yourself. Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. What do I value? I value integrity, reverence for life, nature, family and friends. I don't know that I value grant dollars and publications all that much. I'm ready for other challenges, right? Here's a quote that wasn't, quotes that weren't. No, that's not quite right, because there's only one quote. This is often said. I was at the burial site for Mahatma Gandhi just 10 days ago or so, and this is not something that he said. He's got a lot of other great quotes, but evidently this is not something he said. So know yourself. How do you do that? Myers-Briggs. I'm an INFP. What does that mean? You know, I spent time looking at this and looking at my personality and realizing, you know, my fit compared to some of my colleagues, we don't communicate the same way. I'm a quester by the definition, and please understand me, and I can go through this. I'm going to go through this quick. Another way to know yourself is to take the IDI. It's the Intercultural Development Inventory. It tells you where you are on the continuum for intercultural development. A lot of us like to think we're further to the right on this. The nice thing about this particular tool, it tells you where you think you are, as well as where you are, according to their rating. And that often pisses off people. And the CFANs tried to use this some, and I think enough people got pissed off at where they saw themselves and weren't real happy, so it hasn't caught on. But, you know, basically a university system keeps us down in the minimization, maybe over towards the acceptance. That's the culture of this, any university. Another way to know yourself is Strength Finder. That was big here at the U for incoming students. How many of you have taken Strength Finder? Not very many hands, but a few hands. So where am I? There's 5 different strengths. I'm not on the influencing side, am I? At least according to this. That's somewhat interesting. Another bit of tidbit. Boy, I'm going to have to get to SATG here real soon. Pay attention. You're going to work your lives earning money, but pay attention to where you invest your money. 1987, I worked a couple years in Somalia. I had housing, I had transportation. All I had to do was pay for food. I saved a ton of money. I invested it in the stock market. If I mimicked the Dow, I'd be up tenfold, well, 9.6. But that's kind of a high point when I started on that, and not all of the investments. That's just 2 years of investing $60,000 back quite a few years ago. But the time value of money is important. Don't spend all your time working and not paying attention to where your investments are. Spend time learning about your investments. Okay, a couple quotes. You are only as free as the list of necessities is short. I saw this on the wall at the George Peabody College for Teachers in Nashville, Tennessee, where I spent like 6 weeks as part of training for Peace Corps, because they didn't train us in country because there was a cholera outbreak. So they said, let's do French immersion in Nashville, Tennessee. Figure that out. And then another quote that I like, and it shows how conflicted I am. It's like looking back and longing for the freedom of my chains. So there's something about being chained to a position, to a way of life, but then breaking free of that and having not so many lists of necessities. Let's switch over now to SATG. Here's a picture taken in 1988. The fellow looking at us, talking to the group, is Hussein Haji. Little did I know that I would have a lifelong relationship with that guy when I took this picture. He was a breeder. I was more on the crop fertility side. My counterpart was this guy right here, Abdullahi Genyo. Turns out in 1991, he was killed, he and his daughter. A bomb fell in the wrong spot. So the guy I knew the closest in Somalia didn't survive. We worked on this bi-region agricultural development project. Here's Daniel Abdullahi shoveling some manure, and we would use this manure. This is probably more goat manure than anything. compared goat manure, camel manure with synthetic fertilizer in some of our trials. And basically what we showed definitively was that phosphorus was limiting in the soil. A soil scientist would probably be able to predict that, but there was a lot of confusion. But we showed it, we documented it, and that was revolutionary. You might not know the history of Somalia, but there was a time in 1992, 1993, where we had troops in Somalia. It ended pretty much in disaster in October of '93. I was back there in January of '94, and I heard a different story than Black Hawk Down. There's various narratives. Where you get your information defines your reality. The reality was 93, 94, wasn't a good time, still unstable. Even by 2001, we thought, well, there's a glimpse, it's time. We're gonna hold a symposium. Hussein Haji, who I pointed out earlier, is now this guy, a little more gray. I'm there. We both went to ASA meetings. We said, let's have a symposium in Charlotte where we bring in people who have expertise in Somali agriculture, because real soon it's going to stabilize. Well, it will never stabilize, but we, out of that symposium, created the Somali Ag Technical Group, and it was a 501(c) based out of Canada, where Hussein was from. I should say that he got his PhD, worked for Ag Canada as a tobacco breeder, revolutionized the tobacco in Canada, and it has got material growing in Africa and in Asia, and was a consultant for many years, was very successful, said, you know, I don't smoke, I don't believe in tobacco, I'm gonna walk away from it, I'm gonna move to Nairobi, we're gonna really make SATG work, I'm gonna be a consultant, we'll see where it grows. So we moved SATG to Nairobi and eventually to Mogadishu. Now we no longer have an office in Nairobi, just it's more efficient to be out of Mogadishu. And as a spring off of SATG, over the years, over the last 10 years, we've saved up some money with SATG. Hussein could have pocketed it, like $1 million. They gave us a lot of money. Our annual budget for SATG probably averaged over 10 years $1 million a year. $1 million in Somalia goes a heck of a long ways. Hussein saved it. We said, okay, what are we going to do with this money? About the same time, the NGO community and the donor community said, hey, it's not working. We've been doing this for 25 years. Maybe we shouldn't just have 2-year projects, 3-year, 5-year projects, and then go somewhere else and start something new. Why don't we start investing in private industry? And so we said, we'll be private industry. We'll create a seed company. And we named our seed company Filson. There's a reason for that. There's a story for that. We've built a compound. This shows part of the compound. We have the ability to grow plants at that site with some drip irrigation. More slides just showing the compound. We have a room in the upstairs where we can have classes. There's a college close by, a university close by that we'll have classes. ICRC gave us this piece of equipment, seed conditioner, worth over $140,000. Gave us a person to come in from India to train us on how to use it. People believe in SATG, they believe in Filson, they want to help us work. And I'll go to the next slide. We are these people originally on the board, with Richard Jones, myself, and Hussein kind of being the most active. Julia Howard would be more active. She had a USAID job. Now she's retired from that. Good people, sound people, people of integrity. That's important to work with them. Here's Hussein at Benadir University. The fellow on the right has visited. We brought him in. We have an MOU with his university, but it's just been so hard because Somalia just hasn't moved to the next step. So here's a couple of the projects that we're working on. We've done field trials with maize, with sesame. We're getting funds from USAID, from DFID in the UK, from Concern, worldwide, Red Cross, FAO. We're not lacking for funds. We're lacking for manpower who's trained and educated, and that's one of our challenges. And most recently, I was in Mogadishu last May, working on a project where we're actually working with the government, which is a bit scary, and working with the state governments. But ultimately, that's what one would like to strengthen. But it puts us more at a target from Al-Shabaab and bad players. These are the areas. I had a grad student, Ryan Gavin, many of you know him, who had data from these 3 sites near Mogadishu, who's published a couple of articles. We're waiting on a 3rd one we hope that will get published. Here's a story. I'm sitting in Gibale up in Somaliland, and it's a quiet little community, and this big truck comes rumbling in the background there. And I turn to Hussein and I say, Hussein, what's that truck? That's making a lot of noise. What is that? And he said, oh, that's a mining truck. And I said, oh. And it takes me a little while, and the conversation goes, and I said, what are they mining? And he said, no, they're looking for mines. And we went out to the field, and they were digging up landmines out here. So this is reality. This is what farmers have to face, and Hussein and I as researchers. There's a story here, there's a story here that I'll tell. I'm running a little down, but what are they eating? Corn. What color? Yeah, where do you think that came from? World Food Program. That's food aid. Whoa, figure that out. Camels eating food aid? Well, we did the work on this and said, okay, in southwest Minnesota at Lamberton at what's that, Meadowlands Co-op, on a particular day, August 23rd, 2013, farmers were getting $4.85 a bushel. That corresponds to $19 US per kilogram, 19 cents, sorry. At the same time, Somali white maize was at the farm gate for 24 cents, selling in the market for 28 cents. And also in the market, you could buy yellow maize for 17 cents. So yellow maize was making it to Somalia and being sold less than what the farmers were receiving from it. There's more stories here, but interesting. So people don't like yellow maize in Somalia. It's not, unless you're desperate, you would eat it. But otherwise, they feed it to camels. I was concerned that, geez, zoonotic diseases might be an issue. It's not, because this didn't last very long, because camels don't do good on a regular diet of strictly maize, right? So let's just do a simple comparison of area versus productivity and how much production there is, and it turns out that these are gross numbers. Maybe the US to farmer ratio of production, a farmer would produce 1 unit, whereas one Minnesota farmer would produce 5,000 units. 5,000 to 1 on productivity. This is just a back of the napkin type analysis. Another back of the napkin type analysis is there's 500 million farmers worldwide. How many farmers does it take if they're all as productive as our farmers here in the United States? You could do those calculations, and it might be the world needs 100,000 farmers. What are we going to do with the 490 million people who feed 3 billion people if they're moved out of their livelihood? These are questions. So I'm going to speed this up real fast. Some pictures of me in Somalia. There's my guard. There were 16 guys with guns to get me out to this site. Just some slides showing this. I was supposed to go have a meeting at this hotel. I bought tickets in late August for this, and there was a bombing. Sorry, I got my late July for this. A few days later, there was a bombing at the hotel that I was supposed to be at in just a week or two. Ended up going to Somalia, doing it in a different hotel. This is the world I live in. I'm going to stop on this slide, pretty much, and say this is an interesting slide taken last summer at Columbus, Ohio. What's interesting is this is my grad student, Ryan Gavin. This is Salma Farah, who was a Europe student. And this is another graduate. He was my first graduate student. He's probably going to be my last graduate student that I'm major advisor on. I hadn't seen him in like 30-some years. All these folks are US based. They talked about agriculture, but for example, my former student, Osman, he talked about what he did for his research, for his master's 30 plus years ago, 1987. Nothing's been done since then on below ground storage of sorghum. So, wow. Have I bored you? Is it time for questions? Let's try questions. Okay, or discussion. What have you heard? And there's somebody with a mic who's going to walk around, but I'm not sure who. Oh, I better stay next to this. There's a question over here. And for those of you at the workshop yesterday, this young lady was talked about. So, yes, Kate.
Hi. Thanks, Professor Porter. So I was wondering, I guess there's a question on, there's kind of these cycles that you see of like you need food in order for there to be stability, but stability in order to have food. I'm wondering if you can talk about that.
Whoa, I don't think of it necessarily as a cycle. I think we need food daily. And if we don't have food, there's problems. And I think what we're seeing in Somalia, in Syria, and other locations of the world is the climate's changing, it's getting harsher. That puts people on edge. Especially nomadic people will move over towards settled people, and there will be problems. And that's what we're seeing in Somalia. We can couch it in good guys and bad guys and Al-Shabaab, and we can go droning the Al-Shabaab and saying we're going to kill them. But for every one we kill, we create more people who are unhappy with our policies. Not sure that I answered that question for you, but I rambled a little bit. Other questions? Let's have dialogue. There's a few hands up. As soon as you get a mic, speak up. And hold up your hand for the next person, too. There was somebody. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Paul. Do you work with any Somali farmers in Minnesota?
Do I work with any Somali farmers in Minnesota? I haven't, and I was real slow as Somali population moved into Minnesota to really connect with the Somali population here, partly because a lot of clan issues, and I didn't want to get viewed with one side or another side, so I just avoided it. And to be honest, there aren't that many Somali farmers in Minnesota. There are a few, and they're quite progressive, and they're far away from their country now. But the easy answer is I'm not working as closely as I could, and partly by choice because of concerns of seeing, as I'm citing, one group versus another group. Another question, yeah?
Thank you for sharing your stories. On your bike tours, I was curious, did you stop and meet with some of the farmers, or was it purely observational? Yeah. You know, as you rode by, you would look at the practices and gather information that way?
You know, so every day I had to make it to dinner on time, and so I couldn't stop for very long at any one time. Every fifth or sixth day, we would have a rest day, and we would spend 2 nights in one location. Then I would seek out people and talk to them. Sometimes I got lucky. I remember up near Mount Kenya, north of Nairobi, where we pulled into, there was a female farmer there, and we were able to communicate very well. She came up from Mombasa, the coast, and she wanted to begin farming, and she had manure in hills, and she was planting various trees, species, and she was in it for the long run. But to answer your question, by nature of that expedition, we had to keep moving, so I couldn't have long, detailed conversation. That was the downside of that sort of learning experience, is I got a snapshot I saw what it was like. I could see, is it dry, is it wet, is it rainy season, is it not rainy season? And I could ask questions, how has the weather been? And I could sometimes tell by looking at the crop. But you know, the other way of doing a bike ride like that would be to take your time and do it solo. And we saw a lot of solo riders who were carrying their own water, and that my hat goes off to them. They have to work at it. Another questions? Yeah.
I have a question about the company Filson. Are you working with growers for developing hybrids, or what is the actual seed company like?
Yeah, that's a good question. As part of SATG's effort, we've worked with ICR funding to help with their co-op development. So we have a database of 1,500 or more farmers. They've got cell phones, and so we can connect with them. So we have a farmer base. But to answer your question specifically on hybrids, in the country, there's no hybrid production, there's no hybrid seed, and we're ready to do that. We've tested hybrid material from Simmet on our station, which I didn't talk about, that does very well. But the infrastructure is not quite there. We're going to be ready when the infrastructure, when we feel the infrastructure is there. But I think initially we're trying to clean up the local maize. I suppose it's a land race that's grown there. It was called Somtox, and it came out of Simmet, and many years ago. But it's not the same material that it was 30, 40 years ago. Good question. Yeah. We got time for more questions. Yes.
So I know earlier, a couple slides ago, you showed us the price difference between Somali maize and U.S. grown maize. So besides climate change, do you also think that food aid is a hindrance to Somali agriculture?
Yeah. Maimuna, thank you for the question. Is foreign aid hampering domestic production in Somalia? And we've done a lot with that. We're sitting on a paper right now that's in review, talking about production versus imports versus food aid. And there's no doubt about it that their society has been corrupted by food aid. And food aid is an industry in Somalia. It's a weapon. It's used as a weapon, and how do we break that cycle? We ask people like saying, okay, I haven't talked about the IDPs in Somalia, internally displaced people. There's a lot of people, as you're well aware, that have left Somalia. Close to 1 million people have fled the country, but over 1 million people are internally displaced. They've been moved from farms or from nomadic situations into camps. And you ask people who run those camps or feed people in those camps, well, what's the fate? What's next? And the answer tends to be, we'll feed people, because we don't know what else we can do. It's the humane thing to do. And the food aid's coming in from outside. And we're trying to encourage, and there is efforts by World Food Program to grow it domestically, but there's some corruption that goes on, and we see the corruption. And it's very frustrating, and how do you break that is one of the challenges that we work with and still work with in the system. Yeah.
We have time for one more question.
So you talked about how more productive U.S. farmers are compared to farmers in Somalia, and how if we're all as productive as U.S. farmers, it'd only be 100,000 farmers that we need in the world to feed the world. So much of us in land-grant universities and private companies and nonprofits or whatever, that's basically what we focus on, is making agriculture more efficient and produce more per unit area, right? So if we shouldn't be doing that, what do you think that we should be doing? Or maybe I misinterpreted your statement.
Yeah, I don't know that we shouldn't be doing that. It's certainly nice that we live in a world today where we have 7.5, 7.6 billion people, and we produce adequate calories, we produce adequate food, actually we may be producing too much food, or what we're consuming is not the right amount. Yeah, what should we be focusing on? I wish we would focus on helping the world feed itself and not focus on our exports. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but it's certainly people have discussed it. Food is a weapon. We see it used as a weapon in Venezuela. We put food on the border and say, we have food for you. We help create chaos in the country. It's an example. Yeah, no, I'm not against land grant and what the U.S. mission is to be productive, to be efficient, but I didn't say it, and I'll end with this, in the sense that I realized in my value system that I could work with the top 1%, which are Minnesota farmers, for the rest of my career, or I could work with the bottom 1%, which probably are the Somali farmers, and where do I get more joy? Where do I get more value? And then I look at it and say, well, there's more Somali farmers than there are Minnesota farmers. There are more Somali farmers than there are farmers in all of the United States. I've got the expertise. There are very few people that have experience, very few agronomists, and I probably can't count on one hand who have the experience in Somalia that I have. And therefore, I want to use that experience and that talent. So with that, I'd say namaste, thank you very much. I appreciate you being an audience. And I'll be around for questions as the day goes on.
Well, thank you, Dr. Porter. Yes, and let's move on. And if we have questions, please ask after this.
Next, we're going to have a quick 15-minute break. So help yourself to more coffee, bagels, things like that. Take a stretch. We'll be back here at 10:15 for our next talk.